Well, hello everybody again. This is Donnie, and I was going to show how I'm cutting these little posts right here using my lathe. And time really doesn't permit me to get into how to operate a lathe. This is just going to be a general cutting routine, but there's some things that I would like to point out. If you notice that I've got my dowel stock coming in from over here, I sort of rigged up a temporary station to help keep my stock from just turning all over the place, because if I didn't have something to steady this rod, the eccentricity force, of course, would make this flop all around. So this is just kind of cheating, I guess. I don't really have any other way of doing this, but it works. It's going to keep the rod stable. And before I go any further, let me tell you that these dowels, or any kind of a dowel, is not going to be perfectly round. You're going to have high points and low points. That's the reason why it's very important is when you're using this cross slide here, that you want to dial in very slow until your cutting tool starts clearing away the highs and the lows. Then your cut will start to become more smooth. Now, with this lathe and some calculations that I've made, you can duplicate these posts nearly precise every single time. So I suggest that if you have a lot of posts to make, to do some measurements, get your calculator out, make your measurements, make a drawing, and write down and test, mock up your first cut and experiment with that. Write your measurements down like what I did here. I just got my little sheet here that I go by, and it's just some measurements that I made up. Now, what I'm going to do here is that initially I took this is an XY position on the lathe. If you go in, you're going towards Y. If you go left and right, you're going X. Now, with the lathe, just remember a number is a number. And up here you'll see that we have negatives and we have positives. Now with Shoreline, what they do, they start at the chuck and they go positive towards the tailstock. I don't know why they did that. To me, it makes more sense to go positive, going from the tailstock, going in towards the chuck, to be going positive, not going negative. It really doesn't matter as long as you keep track of the numbers. And what I did here, if you look real close, I have a parting tool, and this tool is only for parting objects that you have already created. But this parting tool can also be used to do other things. I'm just going to use this parting tool to make my post. And if you see, as a reference point, I have my X, which is your left and your right coordinates. I have it set to exactly 0. However, 0 is actually a reference point, because what I did, I took my cross slide and my parting tool and I bumped it straight up to the edge of my chuck, and I made that 0. Then I cranked the slide over 1 millimeter, and then I made that the new 0. The reason being is because for some reason, for safety, if I'm not paying attention and I'm looking at the digital readout, when I reach 0, I know that I'm not going to slam into the chuck. Okay, so now I'm going to measure out the distance that I need. So this is just barely loose enough. Now I can take my hand and feed this rod out. Now what I've done here, I've already measured the distance that I need. There's no point in me telling you what the distance is. I think it's like 13.5 millimeters, but your situation will be different. But with this right here, I just bump it to make sure that it's flushed up against the tool, and I just kind of tighten that with one finger, two fingers. Now I come in here with my what they call a Tommy bar, and I can put this in here and just tighten it very slightly. You don't want to crush your dowel. This is not obviously metal, it's wood, and it will crush. Now I got my length, I got my offset set to 0, and the lathe is going to turn at about 650 RPM. That may sound fast, but really in essence, with the size of the dowel, it really is quite slow. One thing that's very important, when I start making my cut, I'm going to make my first cut out here. Why? Because if I start making my cut here, my indentations, as I work my way out, this dowel will get weaker and weaker because of the flex. As this tool flexes or pushes into the dowel, if there's any cut in here, it'll go ahead and snap off. So anytime you're doing something like these posts, you always cut from here because you got a lot of bulk and strength. So you cut and you cut, or if you want to make 3 indentations, you always start here and work in and then cut it off. If you go the opposite, the pressure of this cutting tool will snap this off before you finish. So what I've done, I wrote down my measurements. If you look at the digital readout, you will see that I'm going to go back to exactly 8 millimeters. Get it right on the dot. Now if you look, and you'll see where the cutting tool is, you'll see this ready to be cut. Now also, as I dial this in, you'll see that the Y measurement, which is going in and out, you'll see that it will get very close to 0. Now as I turn on this lathe, you want to listen for the cut, and when it starts cutting, you want to 0 your Y. I'm going to make a cut which will be 0.36 millimeters in depth. Why I chose 0.36, it's just a number, and it looked good to me. So we're going to go ahead and turn on the lathe. As I cut, I don't want to use a finger on this because it's not smooth enough. I'm just going to use my finger and my thumb, and I'm going to go in, and if you look at we have 680 RPM. You'll see that we're minus 0.2420. We keep going in. As I approach very close to 0, now I can hear that the wood is starting to cut. Now if you look at the cutting tool, you'll see that I will start to make my cut. Now as I have started making my cut, I'm going to go back up to the digital readout, and I'm not concerned about looking at the cut. My focus now is looking at that Y value and cutting it up to 0.36, just like that. Now all I have to do now is back off of it, and you'll see that it's a little bit of a cut there. Okay, now according to some measurements that I wrote down, now we're going to go in 4.5 millimeters, and if you look at the minus 8, we're going to go down to -4.5 exact, just like that. Now if you notice the Y is at -1.42, that is because the slide is pulled out. So now we're going to go and crank in, and we're going to look at our cut. You'll see that the parting tool is now in the correct position. You'll see as it has already started to touch, the parting tool has touched the edge of the dowel. You'll see that we are already at 0.03 centimeters. That's real close. Okay, now we're going to, now that I'm knowing that I'm making my cut, I'm going to gradually work in until it starts to cut. You remember the irregularities in the dowel. I'm going to go ahead and crank it in. To 0.36. We're going to back off. Now here comes the part that you really have to be careful. If you got shaky hands, or if you do not feel comfortable with this, I highly suggest that you do not do this. But I feel fairly safe with what I'm doing. I have already made over 40 of these posts. But what I have here, I have a round file. And I'm going to just use this part of the file, and then I'm going to use this part of the file. This part of the file, I'm going to make some little arches. In this part of the file, I'm going to round off the outer edges of the arches. So again, I'm just going to take this. The XY slide has already been pulled out, so I have enough clearance. So if we look at this, I'm just going to turn this, just putting just a little bit of pressure. This chuck is really not spinning that fast. So we'll go in a few times and we'll go to the next one. And as you can probably see that it's starting to have some arches in here. I'm going to take the wider part of the file and just kind of run up against it just a little bit, because I want to smooth out these crests. I'm going to go back. If you notice that I have my file on the other side, because the chuck is spinning counterclockwise, I don't want to do this because I really can't see how deep I'm going. If I'm on this side, I can really see the depth that I'm filing down and cutting. Okay, I would say that that looks pretty good. And now, while it's still running, now I'm going to dial my my Y coordinates back down to 0. And you'll see that I don't even have to look at the chuck, because I know that when I get to 0, I don't have to worry about ramming into the chuck. And that is something that you really do not obviously want to do. Now we're going to go in and we're going to part the post off. As you get into the camera here, we want to go real slow. You see it is starting to flake. And sometimes what I do is just take it a little bit at a time. And I'm going to gradually hold this to keep it from falling. You just go right in, see it parts off. Now see, I'm back at 0, and so I'm ready to repeat the whole procedure again. And what I do is, this has got a little bit of a residue on it. I'll just take my X-Acto knife here and just kind of cut that off. As you can see that this is exactly the same as the others. Exact same dimension, exact same look. Well, anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this little video tutorial, and I hope that you got something meaningful out of it. Again, please be safe with the file, because you are getting real close to the spinning chuck.